Welcome to Security 402, Enterprise Security via DevSecOps 2.0. I'm Matt Breton, part of the professional services team within the security risk and compliance practice. Within that, it's really our goal to kind of help enterprises understand the shared responsibility model and help them design and architect their solutions as they move into AWS to fully maximize and utilize the security features and functions that we provide. And part of that, we work closely with our clients, such as Intuit, where I'm very happy to be joined up here by Shannon Leitz, the senior manager of the cloud security engineering team within Intuit, as well as the leader within the DevSecOps community. So with that, let's get into our presentation. So really, the goal of this is to kind of take you on a journey, kind of the DevSecOps, where Intuit's going, and kind of how AWS is helping them along within this process, but also kind of show you some of the stumbling blocks that we've come across and kind of let you know where we want to see this community grow to, and kind of reach out to you as well throughout this presentation and show you where you could get involved in here. Because the DevSecOps community really relies upon the contributions of everyone to help further along and ensure that it's growing, because as we'll get into, it's really a journey. We don't really know where that journey is going to take it to, because as new technologies come out, we want to be able to absorb them and gain the benefits of those and not be locked into any single point within this.
Yeah, Matt, thanks so much for the introduction and for having us here today. This has been a multiple-year journey for us. We started out really working with AWS as a partner, and we met several years ago, and I remember our first meeting where we sat around a table and said, what should security be like in the cloud? And at the time, there was a lot of discussions about checklists and how we could really adopt the cloud and figure out how to make things better. And I remember that I wasn't quite the cultural fit for that project at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because as we go through it, we at times want to look really hard at kind of the problems of it and not always look at the solutions. That's where DevSecOps really comes into play, is that it allows us to kind of look at, hey, here's where we want to go, and kind of look at the building blocks that we could utilize to really get there.
So I think it's time to inspire an entire audience to become DevSecOps engineers. What do you guys think? Awesome. Let's break down the barriers and watch as we evolve. We're going to take you on a crawl, walk, run journey, and we're going to tell you about the future, and we're going to talk to you about how you could contribute to the future. So get ready for the ride.
Yeah, it really is an evolving story. We want to keep iterating that through. It's what we've seen already, and kind of working with other clients as well. You're never going to be at the end point where everything is perfect, and we want to get there, and it's kind of looking at how AWS and the clients could all work together to really do that.
You mean perfection is not the end point?
It's technology. It's never going to be the exact perfect. Using those building blocks, which we kind of talked about.
Well, that's incredible. I always thought that we were going to be perfect. We were never going to make any mistakes, and that, oh wait, hold on a second. Mistakes happen, don't they?
All the time.
All right.
Yeah. So kind of talking through this, what we realize is that if you try to get locked in too much, this is the graph of kind of how AWS is evolving. So some of you may have seen this, but if you haven't, what we're showing here is the total number of changes and new features that we're releasing in a year. So last year, we did 514. During Werner's keynote earlier today, he announced we've already done over 500 this year. The year's not over. So it's really hard if you get locked into one type of solution and not be agile enough and kind of be able to evolve with it. Because from our standpoint, AWS's standpoint, we're constantly listening to feedback from Shannon and her team, but also our other clients, to see what features and services you need from us, and that directly impacts our roadmap and our products.
I remember back when we first met, there was sort of a notion that we would all talk about moving our use cases. And at the time, there was sort of a very moderate pattern. We all had looked at instances. And I look back, and I remember actually when it was really the small part of that diagram. And what was interesting at the time is to think about moving our workloads was really about experimentation and getting understanding, which took a little bit of a different thought process and mindset. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, one more. There you go.
Yeah. We started out trying to figure out, how do we deal with this new environment? It's a software-defined environment. It didn't look like our data centers. It didn't have the box with all of the lines to it. It didn't have the notion of a network. We sort of had all these tools that we could adapt. And when we look back on the journey, we started out with these pillars. We thought, well, we've got to educate folks. We've got to get a human-based program going. How can we do that? We can reach out and really talk to folks about cloud security. We can also start to figure out just how to use things. And we had some basic pillars. We got to do security intelligence. Everyone loves a SIEM. Let's bring our SIEM to the cloud. Well, that was interesting. And recon, well, that was kind of a new thing for the cloud. We realized that an API could be really, really beneficial, and that we had to do something about operations, but we really weren't sure on that journey, which quickly became, how are we going to adapt, and how are we going to, as security folks, build something? And it goes back to one of our really first principles. What's our highest and best use as security professionals in DevOps? And this required us to think about it in a different way. So we adapted to this new model and really have thought about, how do we extend our capabilities? How do we think about building tools? And from the mindset of a DevOps professional, how do we get out of their way? And so this journey really took from a crawl position of, we're going to do all the security for all the workloads in our company as security professionals, to a very quick realization that there's a lot of complexity, that AWS moves darn fast, and that all of these new services have such complexity and things that have to be thought about as part of developing a workload. So our highest and best use as a security professional was to adapt our ways and really learn in a bi-directional process from our DevOps teams back and forth between security and DevOps. So this new life cycle was sort of being born, and we realized we've got to build the things that we need, but not really focus on us. We had to figure out how to build tools that everybody could utilize.
Yeah, I also remember that during this initial meetings when we first were getting to know each other, your team was also segmented in these kind of pillars. That you had your support, your security teams, and they're all kind of doing their own things. There wasn't that collaboration really. And now look at your team is so multi-role that each person is being switched between all these different roles so that they understand how they all interact, and now working directly with your business units to ensure that you're actually helping the business unit get what they need from the services themselves as well.
Yeah, I think we really learned about passion and taking all of the security expertise and taking advantage of passion. I think that was a key critical moment. So where are we today? This is actually a really telling story. I remember when we first started talking about doing DevSecOps, I remember going out to LinkedIn and typing in the word DevSecOps and getting back 0. And realizing that I had been doing DevSecOps most of my career and been inspired by the Agile Manifesto, the DevOps movement, and really, if I look out into the organizations that are out there and into the global universe, the rugged movement really spoke to me. How could we take advantage of being more resilient, building our security into workloads, not being afraid of making mistakes and learning from them? And so really, if I think about all that's been done since 2014, all of these pluses are incredible. Today, we're standing in front of you at AWS, and there have been multiple tracks on DevSecOps. There's a lot of outreach, and we're all looking to try and share information and our lessons and our war stories and learn from each other. I learn every time I have a conversation, not only with another security professional, but also with the DevOps teams that we work with. So how can we catch up, Matt?
Yeah, I think if we look at the problem statement that we originally looked at, it's kind of, you understand DevOps. It's kind of that continuous integration, continuous deployment as well. But it's applying that to the security aspects as well. It's understanding that traditional security just doesn't scale. It's not as agile as it needs to be. If we look at the traditional data center, you're putting these massive amounts of infrastructure in place that a year from now, the tax may significantly change. With AWS, if you put a lot of that in a very hardened spot where it's not flexible, it doesn't adapt with the changes of the attack, you're not going to be placed in a spot where A, you're not going to be effective from a security team, but it's also being able to encourage your business to actually use the technology in a way so that they're gaining the additional benefit of security within their products themselves.
And it's an incredible thing to realize that for enterprise cloud security, it's not only about being able to do our job, be able to discover these things, talk about risk management, but really start to figure out how do we have a customer back approach, how do we put security into our products, look at full stack workloads. And so if we look back in time to when we first got started, we had a lot of hypothesis. We did a ton of experimentation to go through that process. And we came out the other end of it saying we've got to establish some principles and sort of a manifesto.
Yeah. So I mean, what we're kind of hinting at here is that we acknowledge that the DevOps, the Agile, the Scrum is on the rise. It's gaining mass adoption. I think everyone uses that, sometimes incorrectly, but it's kind of understanding how that applies to security, and that's really where DevSecOps comes from. And it's a very competitive workplace and landscape from this standpoint. We want to kind of show, and this is the conversation and the story we were really going to be telling today, is how to get to a spot where A, you're comfortable with it, but also kind of showing how to get to it and kind of the lessons that we're learning from this.
Yep. And we've also learned a few things. You know, the competitive landscape is changing. Enterprises are surprisingly big, but also when you look into enterprise cloud security, even the smallest organizations could have such complexity that they become a relatively big organization pretty quickly. Looking out into the rest of the thought leadership out there, there's the notion of perimeterless workloads, thinking about how you build your security in and get it closer to what you're trying to accomplish, so your workload actually carries security with it. And then finally, if I think about it, really, it's an arms race. We're going to get better, and we're going to keep having to move that bar up because attackers are going to keep moving their bar up. So what's the mindset, right?
Yeah.
So when we first started talking, I remember seeing all this paperwork coming about, and I say that I wasn't really a cultural fit because when it came down to it, I walked in with a bunch of automation, and I said, okay, we're going to automate our vulnerability detection, we're going to pull in all of these different things, and so what we're going to show you today is a bunch of demos from crawl through run that are going to show you our technology and basically share with you some of the things that we think are important, and as a security professional, really what it looks like to operate DevSecOps style, but more importantly, this is an example of what could be done, but not the only way in which DevSecOps can be practiced.
And I think the big part here is this plug on the bottom, the devsecops.org. It's really going to rely upon you and your peers and everyone else to really contribute back. And if you want to kind of go into like how they can contribute as well.
Yeah, so we started a manifesto, we wrote a bunch of things and realized that it was absolutely important to go tell the story. As security professionals, you can imagine telling stories, talking to other people, and really having communication is a really big change. DevSecOps has really become something that we believe in and need other people to contribute to. So as you're running your experiments, there's an experimentation section, there's a LinkedIn group, we have Twitter, we're going out and talking, we're encouraging people to do call for papers, go out and talk about it yourself, talk about your experiments, give out your war stories, because it's truly important for everybody to learn from you, just like us. So let's talk about crawling.
Yeah, so when we think about this, everyone always wants to start running. I mean, I wanted to run, Shannon wanted to run, everyone wants to get to that end point. But there really is a benefit to crawling. You do learn a lot as it. We'll give you kind of some of those examples. And I mean, where do you start is often the next question when we're talking to clients. You could obviously start thinking about this whole massive meetings that kind of say, hey, we're going to think about doing this, we're going to consider this approach or that approach. You can start looking at checklists, those 1 or 6 pagers, the Amazonian way to do it. But really, it's trying to get your security as code. I think that's, as soon as you get that automation, which is really that crawling aspect of it, you gain a lot of functionality. You gain the agility that allows you to take those next steps that could transform into that walking phase. But to get there, you really have to rely upon and know kind of what to look for.
Yep, and we're going to tempt fate today. We're going to try and run 3 demos, our crawl demo, our walk demo, and our run demo. And when we look at how this works, we said we're going to need to get to security as code, but as practitioners, there really wasn't a path. We had looked out into the world and said, okay, so who's doing this? And who's doing it well? Yeah. And when we looked, we didn't see a lot. We heard a lot of folks talking about checklists and how we're going to work through our controls and go through that process. And I will show you personally how we went through that process. It's going to be an interesting ride.
So having that security as code is easy within Amazon. We say that, but we do actually mean it. We provide the APIs and we provide you the data, but it's actually then using that to your ability. And that's kind of one of the demos that Shannon's going to give, is kind of how to start looking at that and actually start making that meaningful for your organization. It's not just kind of saying, oh yeah, we're getting all those logs. We're now after the config rules and stuff like that, actually using those to actually better your environment, setting up the guardrails and the processes and procedures ahead of time so that when something happens, because as we're alluding to, mistakes happen, it's technology, something's going to go wrong, something's going to happen, but you already have those in place so you know how to move forward with it. You already have it coded out, so therefore you understand what's actually happening.
And remediation can happen in minutes, where a lot of life cycles out there to do network-based changes have taken days to years. It's a really different environment. So let's get started. Last year, we talked to you a little bit about the process of going through a set of experiments to figure out what DevSecOps was. And we began with security as code. I remember back very clearly that we started with very few people in our environment that could code from a security perspective. And this meant that the API was really fundamentally not something we understood. We knew how to apply things like PCI. We knew how to take NIST controls and move them forward. We knew what that was, but we really didn't understand the software-defined environment very well. And so when we started looking into this, we said, okay, so what's the first thing we could do? Well, let's take a look. We're going to do IAM first, right? So one of our first experiments was absolutely awesome. It led us down this path, and it got us to a point where when we think about doing a demo, we're going to talk to you today about how we did everything from a crawl perspective. So I'm going to quickly go into our crawl demo here. And you're going to have to bear with me because I am going to share. So let's see how much resolution I have. So how many controls was it going to take? And how did we get started? We have some fundamentally awesome tools at Intuit. One of them is QuickBase. You'll see here something called our MCB. This is how we started with the cloud. It's what we thought was security as code. We're going to use our software. We're going to take our understanding of the world. We're going to start taking all of these things. We're going to rationalize controls. We're going to adapt them to our environment. And then we're going to have all of our developers be able to leverage these 2,100 entries and make them work for the stuff that they're building, and we're going to be able to build code in 3 years. So that was what was presented to me when I first got to Intuit, is that we were leveraging the MCB. And I'm actually kind of making a little bit of light to it because honestly, we learned. And this is actually one of the parts of the war story, right? This is a scar that we have. We went through this process. I remember going through very deliberately with some of our compliance folks. Compliance operations wasn't born yet. We worked through all of this text. This was a lot of effort. And when we think about all the things that went into it, it actually got us something that was really a pearl of wisdom. We realized that we needed CloudTrail, because we had so much of the angst of we've got to be able to do audit and we've got to be able to do it well. And that's how that came to bear. So one of the other things that happened, and I'm going to pull up my GUI here. So we realized that we had hundreds of accounts at the time. We were experimenting really quickly. You're going to see here we built something called a GUI assumer, because at the time, we as security professionals really didn't even know how to get ourselves involved in the movement of moving from an environment that did traditional software development into one that started to take advantage of these tools. And so you're going to see here real quick, we built out roles to embed into the environment. And I'm going to go grab my MFA. Sorry, I'm scrolling. And what you're going to see here is how we took that MCB and started to apply it. We're logging into an account, and the first thing we started doing, because we didn't have CloudTrail at the time, this was years upon years ago, we would log in as security professionals, and we would look around, and we would find certain things. And what we would go in and find is we'd look into IAM, we'd see how many users were there, we would look at the groups, the group names. All of this has been set up so that I could show a little bit of the scar tissue, right? We had a bunch of these things. Okay, great, here's all the roles, everything's good, looks like RBAC, we're good to go, right? Right. Well, it turns out, when it comes down to it, that didn't quite work out so well. And so we realized from a few other scars, we got a few abuse reports that we were learning things, right? And so we started building out the next thing, which was, well, our policies are gonna have to become a little bit different. And so instead of having 2,100, we ended up with about 40. And they're kind of ugly. This is Markdown. We actually moved away from our QuickBase. We moved into something that was a little bit different. And we started making it so that teams could basically carry these things with them from workload to workload, and almost like a checklist, but really give them the guidance. And there's things in here like put MFA on your IAM. There's things that are really easy to do, like make your security groups lock down, don't open things up to the world, encrypt your workloads. And so we really worked our way through that process. And so we got Cloud Security Policies 1.0 out. And then we sort of realized that we had to go educate and work through that process. And so that's really what crawl looked like back in the day. So flip back. All right. So everybody like crawl? You ready to go take on the crawl challenge? 2,100 controls, anybody? Right? So, by the way, we're telling that story so you don't do that. Don't do that. We have been working in the industry, advising, recommending, working with AWS to get them to realize that we can't do 2,100 controls and help somebody to build something quickly.
Yeah, it's also kind of a key point here, kind of looking at the documentation aspect of this. It's important to document why you're choosing something, but often it's just not enough to say, okay, this is why. And then when you're actually looking at your policies and everything, I think one of the great things here is converting it into like Wiki. We really want these documents and these policies and everything to really be living documents. No longer should you have this binder that sits on a shelf that's gathering dust every day, but it should be either checked into a source code repository, a wiki or something that's actually actionable and keeping up to date with what you're doing within your environment as well. So as you use new services, you want to ensure that your policies and everything reflect how you're using those services, those use cases around that, so that you understand the total risk of your organization and how it applies.
One of the things that occurred to us during the crawl stage is we were solving for ourselves. So the next question on our head was, wait a minute, who really matters?
Yeah, so when we look at this, oftentimes it's all these different organizations, your operations that's kind of feeding your security, your developers and everything. But really what it should be is something slightly different, where these are all the same person. So these different organizations are all feeding into that one central repository, including the red team as well. Often this team is kind of kept out of this whole process, but it is very important because at the end of the day, these are the people that are going to be actually finding stuff that's actually vulnerable within your account today.
Absolutely.
And then when we throw in the blue team, because you don't want to stay a red shirt for too long, because that's never good from living perspective, you get this purple shirt. But is it really a purple shirt, or is it something else?
It might be something else, and I think we're trying to get many more of these.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's really what we're calling a purple squirrel. The squirrel is an animal, obviously, that's digging around searching for stuff within the environment and trying to make sure that they're living and that they have a good life ahead of them. And this is exactly what you want that security DevSecOps role to be. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to find what's wrong with your environment and making sure that your brand as an organization is a secure brand and that you're moving forward as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to realize that as being part of a purple squirrel team, there's 38 in the world right now because they put that on their LinkedIn. I think we can build many more purple squirrels, but I think it's even more important to think about the fact that a purple squirrel is not enough.
Yeah, so it has the knowledge, but you actually have to apply that knowledge too. And so within this, we have to include the AWS knowledge as well. So this is where professional services and our white papers and our documentation that we provide online is really helpful for this movement, because it's our goal to really ensure that you have the knowledge around what to look for.
And I think it was really important for us as a security team to go from our crawl stage to actually leverage AWS and put our hands on it, because one of the biggest lessons we had was we couldn't advise from afar. We couldn't just build documentation. We needed to actually put our hands on stuff and make tools and work through the process like a developer so we could easily understand it. We've gone through things like whitelisting. We've gone through the effort of really working through our tools and making things better.
Yeah, the other part about this too is, I remember Shannon, one of the first times I met her, one of the things she really drives into her team and everyone that she works with is, when you're talking to your client, an internal client with an Intuit, or from our perspective, you have to be able to talk from a position of knowledge and actually be able to communicate what is actually happening. So yeah, reading the documentation is great, but having the experience and understanding how the business is trying to use it and be able to communicate that effectively is a key point in this too, because if you're not understanding how the business is trying to do something and actually have hands in the product, as Shannon says, you're not going to be able to be trusted in the future as well.
Exactly. So why don't we hop over to walking? I think it's really a crucial part of this process. So walking is a really important part of what we've learned. We started to leverage AWS. The security team got its own accounts. It started to work through the process of what did it mean to have to make something secure on its own. And this journey, and it's a journey, by the way, everybody makes mistakes, started with the thought process of how do we start to bring everybody together, operate with DevOps, really tell the story, figure out how to mature, and then ultimately not just solve for ourselves, bringing in all this information that we can, hold dear and write our reports, but actually start to provide things like this. How do we allow somebody to make decisions, make it scalable, work our way through that process? And it started with the fact that somebody has to make these decisions internal to the teams. These types of tools have really helped us to start to talk about the different ways about thinking about things, figuring out, well, on premise, we're going to have one set of rules. In a cloud environment, we're going to have another set of rules. When we're thinking about our cloud journey overall, we've got to go through that ultimate process and figure out what we think and how we're going to learn and how we're going to share. And so a tool like this became important. Then the second part of walking, which was also really important, was that we wanted to figure out how we were going to govern policies. Matt?
Yeah, so when we start looking at this, again, it's coming back to your security as code. You want to ensure that your policy remains active. This is where source code repositories and actually understanding now with config and having those events in place to actually understand within your accounts, maybe it's one account, maybe it's hundreds or thousands of accounts, it's understanding, are these proper policies in place? Are your employees trying to do something malicious? Is someone outside your firm or organization trying to do something malicious? And ensuring that you have that baseline in place so that you know the current state of your environment and that you understand the overall risk posture of everything, because that's really what it comes down to. Your risk posture is eventually going to become how trusted is your brand. Because if anything were to happen, it's not just a bad mark of security, but in many organizations, it's your brand that's actually taking that big hit as well.
Awesome. So we also learned during our walk phase that there was something called a full stack. So it wasn't just about our instances, it wasn't just about setting up our console, but they all worked together. And so thank you, Veracode, because during RSA, you talked about going through a full stack hack process. And this was an incredible talk that Veracode gave. And when we look back on it, several years ago, we started investigating things in this way. Our diagrams were certainly not as pretty as this, but really we started to think about the fact that there were no boundaries. There really wasn't a magic box that everything was going to fit into. We had backhauling, we had front hauling, we had connected things up. And we ran different experiments to really understand and address things like hybrid cloud, private cloud, and ultimately what we came up with is a cloud is basically just an API with a lot of services behind it. And they're all API-based services. And when you try to turn them into something else, it becomes relatively difficult, adds a lot of security complexity, and makes it possible to traverse through a full stack attack and escalate privileges and do things that you just didn't anticipate.
Yeah, to that point as well, it's more than just your AWS environment, your data center environment. As you really start using hybrid approaches and having third parties and everything else, everything is becoming a connected environment in some way. It's understanding how your environments are connected and ensuring that a compromise of one doesn't automatically lead to a larger compromise. Making sure that you have these tripwires and understanding those connections so that you understand your entire risk profile and that you're agile enough as you move forward to put the proper controls in place.
So the other thing we learned was complexity is going to kill us. We've got to simplify. We really just need to get down to a basic set of processes. How do we discover? How do we evaluate? How do we do basically a really lean security cycle, get to a research level where we can run smaller experiments, smaller workloads, and get a sense of what's vulnerable and how? This sort of came in and basically helped us to understand what red teaming was and how those things came to bear.
Yeah, so I think the next thing that really came into is how do you communicate this? Because obviously you could show massive charts and everything, but is there easier ways to do that to your clients?
You know, and this is where grading came from. I talked about this a little bit earlier at the evidence part of this show. And when I think about what we have to do as practitioners, it's all about turning this information into something consumable and easy, which means that I can't just give a CVE score out and basically have somebody understand what it means. Is it something I should do really quickly? Is it something I should do fast? You know, how do I think about this when I'm putting out all kinds of features? And fortunately, the security team even has had to go through that process, which means we've taken security people through the journey of how hard it truly is to make these things happen. And we actually grade our own stuff.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is to really have that communication and have it clear and concise to the business. Because often the business may not understand CVE scores, may not understand what a risk posture is, but translating into letter grades or some other format, heat maps or something along that line, that's something that they could easily see and understand, which then they could be graded upon and shown to management, say, hey, here's our risk posture, here's kind of how our organization looks like from an actual understandable fashion, so that that could drive change within the organization as well. Because at the end of the day, I want to make sure that we're not saying, hey, security won't let us do something. Security is letting us gain a better insight into our environment and understanding of how to do something in a way that A, is secure, but more importantly, allows our business to feel comfortable and move forward at what they want to do.
Absolutely. So why don't we move on to our walk demo and progress a little bit faster. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I go lessons learned already? Sorry. All right, so last we left off, we were on Cloud Policies 1.0, right? Now we're going to leverage that. We've learned a few lessons here. We went from a couple of hundred accounts, some experiments, to really understanding that blast radius matters. Blast radius is all about how do you confine workloads, how do you get them small enough so that if something does happen, it doesn't take out your whole company. And so when it comes down to it, how do you shard your workloads? How do you think about your accounts? They now become containers. But then you add the complexity of having to manage that as a security professional, which means that you have to have other tools to make it so that you can pull back information from your entire fleet. And so what we've done with our GUI assumer from before, because humans don't scale, we have to all go into the GUI and basically start to evaluate things, doesn't work. We've now moved on to an AMI checker, and this really helps us to understand things that are relatively important in our environment. I'm going to run it real quick, and again, I'm going to go through. And you'll see it's a running theme here that I love MFA. Shout out for MFA. You'll love MFA too. I think my team loves MFA right now too. So you're going to see here, I'm running it. Basically, it's running through every region for this account. And when you start to have to run hundreds of accounts, thousands of accounts, you're going to be doing this quite often. And you're going to be looping through every region. You're going to be looping through every VPC in that environment. You're going to be finding and detecting some of your resources and going through this process and basically pulling up information to figure out specifically rules about that set of configurations in the environment. This allows you to pull that information down. It goes into a MongoDB right now. And I'm going to show you just simply a CSV for the purposes of this demo, but there's a lot that you get out of this. So this actually created a CSV file for us, and I'm just going to take the magic pill. So I don't have to type it all out, and maybe it's already there. It is. So you're going to see the output now is not just something that can be put into a hold on a second. They change all these tools so often, right? So it's a little bit bigger for us. So when we look at this, you're going to get all this rich information about your environment. It's a lot of numbers. It's a lot of information that you're going to have to go through. The tooling that you're going to have to be able to respond to things has to be able to be purpose-built, meaning that as you get an abuse report from AWS for all the accounts that you might have to manage, the complexity just went up. You're going to be managing information. You're going to have to do keying. You're going to have to work through what's my account number, what's my AMI, which instance are we talking about, who brought it up. All of these questions become really important, especially not only in a response activity, but how do you protect these resources becomes part of that everyday process. And so we've had to go through and just out of sheer need, build these tools so that we could scale our capabilities and get to a selective set of blast radius principles. And then in addition, I'm just going to bring that down. We also realized that we couldn't just simply support what we needed to do. We had to also figure out very specifically, what were we going to do with all that information, and how were we going to take advantage of it, and what did it mean? Well, we realized very quickly a 24/7 SOC is really important. We reached out to FireEye, Mandiant, because if you're going to do anything in incident response, you bring the best into your organization to work with you and learn and innovate. We brought in a lot of CloudTrail. You'll see there's 71 million events in here right now. Our data goes up and down all the time. There's billions of events. We also realized that we were going to have to do more than this. This was one part of the equation. We've worked on how do we bring in more and more data. Be careful what you wish for. We've asked AWS for a lot of data, and it starts to become a big impact on how you're going to take that information in and make something of it. They also have given us a set of rules, so we've really influenced how things get pulled together. On these rules, you'll see we have rule packs and all kinds of awesome tools to work with. And as part of this, we've also influenced a lot of the things that go into the feature set for these products. The industry right now is also learning along with us, and as we think about that process, there will be a lot of mistakes, but we're all going to learn from them. We just hope that we're not the ones that caused the mistake in the first place. So I wanted to just bring that up, and then in addition to the walk phase, so this is a whole bunch of people who have learned how to code. We've got tooling. We're starting to see DevSecOps take place. You've got security operations. You've got tickets being created in Jira that are going to your developers. We're speeding up, right? We're getting to the point where hopefully at near real time, we're able to tell you, hey, by the way, that's not a good idea. Don't do that. And so we've built up a practice around this, and in addition, we've built up some security science. You're going to see today later around 5:30, our security scientist, chief scientist, is going to talk to you about how we do security science and some of the learnings that we've had. One of those major lessons has really been about how we think about our workloads, how long they need to live, the refresh rate. So every 2 weeks, you're likely to get a critical vulnerability that's going to impact your workload, your AMIs, and you're going to need to refresh your stacks constantly. We know that that's an important part of the process, and it's actually what raises the bar pretty significantly, is that the cloud allows you to take advantage of the dynamic nature of the environment. All right. The other thing that we set up for this is basically we've run a scan and shown you that we've got a bunch of information in here, and this is what a developer gets from us. It's no longer a report that's 3,000 pages long. It's really easy to understand. There's a grade and a letter grade to it. We've really worked through and assigned these things so that we can make it so it's easy enough for them to change their code and work through that process. So let's flip back.
Yeah, so I mean, when we think about this, we've actually learned a lot during this phase. A lot of it isn't that new, though. It's just reapplying it to how you may be doing a traditional data center in your traditional infrastructure to how you're doing it now and being able to compensate for that large amount of data. We frequently get the question, as Shannon pointed out, is, hey, we want more data. We want more logging. We want to be able to see everything. And we've been providing that. A great example is VPC flow logging and CloudTrail and everything. But just getting that data is not enough. It's how you're going to be using that. How are you actually gaining insight from that data in real time or near real time so that you could actually be proactive in your environment and actually understand what's really going on there.
And as you saw a little bit earlier, we started to correlate data across not only our instances, but also in CloudTrail. What's really interesting is the number of different tools, the number of different measures we now have, the different control types. Things like MFA actually get checked through a similar GUI, a command line check. We've converted over to APIs. We've gotten to the point where we run scheduled jobs. All of that information goes into a set of Splunk tools, our Mandiant tools, and we've expanded out on our experiments to really understand what it was going to take for that set of petabytes of data. We've also realized that really interestingly enough, we need AWS a lot more to help us with that problem because the tools that they provide allow petabytes of data to become big data analytics and allow us to find the needle in the haystack pretty easily. I'm truly looking forward to QuickSight because of that.
So I'm sure now everyone's asking, how do you get up and running quickly? This is really great for if you have that long path, but I want to get up and running real quick. What do I do?
Awesome. All right, so here we're going to try and help you guys out. Don't crawl. Try not to walk. You might have to because you're going to have to bring a whole bunch of people along. If you've got to walk for a very short period of time. We kind of think that the answer here is going faster, working on things that are out there already. There's a lot of different projects we've had to learn. They've evolved over the period of time that we've been working on this. So it's not that we were, behind the times and we just didn't know things. It was absolutely that the technology that was out there at the time just didn't exist. CloudTrail absolutely wasn't there when we got started. We've really been working on pushing that envelope. And ultimately, the biggest issue that a lot of companies face is thinking that you're not going to have mistakes in the environment, that somehow you're going to be able to build perfection into your workloads. It's absolutely about getting rugged.
Yeah, so then when we start looking at it, we start looking at kind of what running actually looks like. It's that operation model, that process. It's around all of you as well, contributing back and sharing how your tools look, how you're actually gaining insight into your environment to actually start building and running these tools and rules within it so that everyone's gaining that insight and the ability to quickly get into this running phase.
And we started open contribution. We're doing GitHub internally. We've got GitHub Enterprise. And we've set up our processes so that we could make it so other people could work with us in the organization. And more importantly, we've realized it's about the community. How could we build faster meant defining what the problem was, figuring out what those tools are that we need, bringing development to us, working on things like whitelisting services, making it so that that process was actually inherent not only for us to work on, but something that the developers could also contribute into.
When we start looking at this, one of the key points here is iterate. The purpose here is not to accomplish everything day one, but it's to take these small steps, have these small little wins so that you can keep building on that. And from the business perspective, you're able to show that win and continue to move forward quickly.
Yeah. And then on doing open contribution, it's all about versioning and having the right committers. You could take your security team and really evolve it very quickly by putting them into the role of a committer. It's almost like being a reviewer, but you get the benefit of 80% of the work being done by people in the community, and that gives them the opportunity to also get trained as part of that process. So you're sort of creating this environment, this ecosystem that allows you to learn in line with what you're doing and the development that you're going to be doing as part of your job.
So are we ready to build some DevSecOps platforms?
Yeah, I think it's your turn now.
Yeah?
No, hold on, we're not ready there. So, what are we gonna build today? We are going to go through what it has taken. Folks have seen this slide before, but have asked for us to add a little bit more clarity into what this looks like. And so today we're going to show you what we're doing and where we're going in the future, and absolutely how you can participate, how your teams can participate, and what that looks like, and where we're really looking for a lot more folks to come to that. So let's get started. It's all about ingestion, big data, security analytics and science, and insights. Being smart, giving information out to your development teams, helping them to make decisions, helping them to make the right decisions, and make information available from the very end of the security process, which is your operations. When something gets broken into, why aren't you sharing those lessons back with your developers as quickly as possible? All right, all about the demo.
Do it this way. So one of the things we learned early is that we want to be more proactive with our clients, both internal and external clients. And one of the things that we realized is that today, there isn't availability of a tool set to actually check your cloud configuration before you're actually deploying it. So oftentimes the business was stuck with, hey, we're going to deploy this, then run the check. It didn't quite meet our security parameters that the security team is requiring. Therefore, I have to take it out, shut it down, and rebuild it, and then retest it again. So one of the tools we came up with was the ability to actually programmatically create unit tests, share these unit tests across everyone, and actually get the output of that test. So for example, one of the things we're going to show you today is kind of what this would look like. So here, what we're showing you is kind of what a unit test would look like. So here, again, this is going to be available kind of as an open source, but essentially the goal of this unit test is actually walking through a CloudFormation template and looking if port 22 is open to the internet. This is one sample, so from a security standpoint, you may want to know all your CloudFormation templates that have port 22 open to the internet instead of having it locked down to a specific Bastion host or something, so therefore it's a less secure environment, hypothetically. So what we're able to do is combine a few of these, so another one could be around the health check of an ELB or something, make this into a policy document, and then encourage your people to actually test that. And then what we're able to actually do is run this across a CloudFormation template. So right here, what we're seeing is actually the CloudFormation, the checker, that's actually pulling in a specific CloudFormation template and comparing it against a list of unit tests to actually get a result. And the output of this is actually saying, yes, this CloudFormation template does have port 22 open to the internet, and therefore we could actually drive actions off of this, such as an enhanced security review of this to ensure that it is conforming to the organization's best security practices. And the goal of this is to get the community of DevSecOps to actually help build out these unit tests so that as organizations are all sharing this, they're getting the benefit of everyone's experience as well.
So Matt, you said that it's going to be open source. What if it already is? So folks, we have posted Radar, and we've started the process of figuring out what Radar is going to be. You'll see here on the DevSecOps.org website, we've started to enumerate this out. You can easily get to Radar at this location, and you can fork and send pull requests to work on it. We've pushed down the security checker that Matt just showed, which is part of the Radar package, and we're working on putting an API in front of this so that you can have your development teams submit unit tests into this environment and take advantage of it. It's truly something that we're really proud of and excited about doing. So the other thing that we started thinking about with our process here was that we needed to get a little bit more involved in the community, and that we had to take advantage of other open source tools, petabytes of data, how you arrange them, that early picture about how we went from 4 pillars to a really complicated but important stack is part of this process. And so we're learning. In the last couple of days, we started working on something called Forecast. And Forecast, I'm going to walk you through the process of how Forecast kind of came to bear, and then I'm going to tell you about the speed of Forecast and how long we took to really start this process. And we know that we've got a long way to go, so please bear with us as we work through this process. But we're going to do it with the community instead of a big thud. We're going to work with everyone to try and make it so that we can develop really great capabilities and learn from each other. So the next part of this process was we looked out and said, all right, well, so we've got to figure out what's out there. There's lots of great stuff. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to build a huge database. AWS gives us lots of awesome tools. There's something called the ELK stack. Ooh, data science was awesome. We got a bunch of information, really excited that Elasticsearch posts these things out. And we walked through the process. Who else was doing these things? So we looked out and saw that there was this CloudTrail tool also built off of Elasticsearch. And some of the other tools that we've leveraged in our environment have these capabilities. And I'm sort of walking you through this process, but I am going to actually show you a demo of the beginning of Forecast, and also our plans about it and what we're going to be doing as QuickSight comes out, how we're going to adapt it. So we looked through all of the docs for Elasticsearch. We realized we weren't very good at some of this. And all of a sudden, we found out that AWS had something called EMR. And we worked through whitelisting it. It took us a few months. We asked for things called HDFS encryption. We've gone through that process. So they just released it recently. We kind of inspired some of that on purpose so we could take advantage of it. EMR bootstrap actions, this is a little bit old project, but we've taken it in and we've started to adapt it so that we could put this up in our repo and start to take advantage of it and let everybody else do so as well. That led us down the path of trying to figure out how to run EMR as a security team, got us down the create cluster path, absolutely walked us down the what the heck is Logstash? Okay, great. We've all been working off of Splunk for a long time. We love Splunk. It's absolutely been a best-in-breed tool for us, and we would never walk away from it because we actually find a lot of great things about it. But there are specific workloads that we get advantage from trying to run in a different way. More importantly, it's about things that we've already done. We've invested in a profiling agent. You'll see Inspector came out. It's also a profiling agent. We're trying to figure out how can we take the things that we did, maybe even throw them away and move into the Inspector agent and take advantage and also contribute back on it. We know that the game here is about pivoting and learning and moving forward and constantly changing. We realized that we could take information out of S3, we could put logs into S3, we could consume them and absolutely ingest at a better quality rate than we were getting by streaming data like a network-based model. And then we realized we could do something that was going to be interesting, which is walk through the process of visualization and maybe even figure out how we could give dashboards out to our community. And so we looked into even Graylog. We've been kind of walking through all these different things. There's a ton of tools out there. There are a lot of open source. And oh, by the way, it's really great to start these projects and these POCs, even if you plan on using the commercial tools, because your security team is going to get the advantage of running these types of things in AWS and getting the lessons from them. It's not just simply about reading the book, going to a workshop, but absolutely having to run these things gives you a different perspective as a security person having to do them. And then we also looked into Yelp. Yelp built something called ElastAlert. And ElastAlert allows you to take an Elasticsearch-based workload and turn it into an alert and a rule-generated event, which makes it so that we can push out alerts at night, so we're actually getting informed. And they provide a ton of documentation, gone through this huge process of making valuable things available. So I'm going to kill that one and come out over here. So we set up our ELK stack, and it's the very beginning, and it's absolutely in its infancy. The team has been working through this process of making things available. I'm going to go through, and we have a dashboard here. We've got something called the profiler agent in our environment. We've got a variety of tooling that we've been working through, and we've been getting informed by the rest of the community on what this should look like. We've been working with companies like Tanium. We've been working with other companies like Cloud Passage, and we've got stuff coming in from Evident.io. You have to merge all this data together, and sometimes it's not just simply about the logs and the reaction time, but about simply providing tools that allow your developers to take advantage and budget their own security needs, make their workloads secure. So you've got to basically have the ability to tune to your environment, and this is how we're doing it. So this is the very beginning of something we're calling Forecast. We're publishing out all of the scripts for this, and we're looking for community involvement. We're building out rules and all of the different information to add things like the CloudTrail checks that we use. We've got a huge amount of checkers that we've gone through the process of working on. And if I look at doing a list of just all the different things that we've done, we've built a lot of tools in our environment. We've gone through the process of building cloud formation checkers, EBS checkers, multi-factor checkers. And so if I think about what this should all look like in the end, why not have something where we can take in all that information and create really cool tools and even give out the scripts to our developers to put these things in their own environment and take advantage of them. It allows us to not only do our work, but also help them with the work that they need to do and help them move faster. So we're really excited about this project. Like I said, it's going to end up being moved in. What's great about Kibana, Logstash, and Elasticsearch has been simply, one, that AWS has invested in some of these things. Elasticsearch as a service has come out. You know that you've got the ability to now take advantage of QuickSight. That preview is in the works. And our future for this set of tools is really about taking advantage of AWS services that are available to us, taking advantage of community involvement, taking advantage of open source, building that community, and also working with the vendors out there, because sometimes we're not going to be able to have enough time as a security community to volunteer all of our efforts and get to a commercial grade level tool. But it's absolutely part of the process of getting the lessons and understanding necessary to be the best valuable DevSecOps for your organization.
So let's talk about what's actually next then. So how do people take the next steps?
How do you take the next steps? You get involved. It's all about joining our effort. It's all about making your own effort, but letting us know about it. We're not trying to be the only thing around. We're not trying to disrupt anything out there. There's SecDevOps. It might be the flavor for your organization. There's Rugged DevOps. Josh Corman has been doing it for a really long time. You can get involved in the LinkedIn group. You can get involved in writing how-tos. You can write rules. You can submit them. You can do pull requests. We're looking for other projects that are out there, collecting that knowledge, sharing, looking for experimentation. I learned a ton of stuff this morning just simply sharing stories and asking about things that were out there. Absolutely, there are a lot of things that AWS is providing and creating for us, but they aren't doing everything that we need for a specific use case, and so you are going to have to take advantage of all that they provide, and in addition, the things that you're going to need to add on to that to make it secure and safe.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, it really is the community, independent of what you call it. It's the sharing of information and best practices that's really going to allow us all to move forward in an agile, secure way, so that we don't each have to reinvent the wheel. We don't each have to have the same stumbling blocks as we move forward, but instead we're moving in a smoother fashion since we're taking best practices. If someone's going to be more advanced in something than another person, we all don't have to have that same stumbling block. We now move forward cleaner, we move more agilely, and help the business actually adopt and move forward in a secure way as well.
Yeah, and you know, there's been a lot of questions about what DevSecOps is and if there's only one flavor of it. There's SecDevOps, there's really a build your security into a workload, the notion of CI/CD. Those are all critical elements, but they're absolutely complementary to what we've been doing. This effort is not just about operations, but about tying it all together and really experimenting through the different use cases. So we're really excited about it. We want to get your excitement in it, and we want to bring all of your engineers to this effort because we think that the right thing to do for the rest of the industry is really increase how we all work together.
So at this point, we want to thank you all for attending. Please do fill out the evaluations via the mobile app. It really gives us the feedback around kind of what you're looking for, and also provide the feedback from the DevSecOps.org as well. So thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thank you.